Alright, so I'm taking a look at an exemplar that we've written up for the investigation of how many apples, or an apple orchard where we're looking at comparing the number of apples on a tree trees near the river and apples on the trees far away from the river. So most of you should have your own data set from this, from the samples we took in class. But if you don't, you can base it off of this one as well. So keep in mind that in our statistics we're taking a look at using the PPDAC cycle. So purpose, plan, data, analysis, and conclusion. And the idea that purpose is really the same thing as a question. So our first thing I'm going to look at here is our question. And a couple things you need to make sure you identify. So we need to get our population, our variable, the units, and make sure it's a comparative question. So as we go through our populations, I wonder if the trees growing near the river have a higher median number of apples per tree than the number of apples per tree for trees growing far from the river. Those are kind of the groups for us, and this is in the apple orchards. We need to be specific about those two different populations and where they're from. Next thing that we would look at might be the variable here, just to clarify what that is. Our variable here is the number of apples per tree, and again, the median number of apples per tree. And this is a comparative question, meaning that we need to have some sort of ER on there. Is it bigger, smaller, taller, wider? And here we can see that they're higher. We're making it a comparative question, and it is about the medians. Your question has to be about the median of the two different groups. Alright. Next thing would be the plan. And here we've got to describe how we're going to collect our samples, and there's two parts to it. So the first part is to state your sample size and then justify why you are taking one that size. So generally we're going to say our sample size is roughly 30, usually 30. So I would say I'm going to take a sample of 30 trees from trees growing near the river, and a sample of 30 trees from trees that are growing far from the river. So I'm taking a sample for each group of 30, not 30 total. And the reason why I'm choosing a sample size of 30 is because this is large enough for me to get a fair representation of the population. Okay, so 30 is a reasonable size. Anything smaller than that, we might not be able to get a very good idea about the population, and more than that, it's just going to give us an even better idea. But 30 is a reasonable one to do if you can afford the time and afford to actually do it. So the next step for us would be then to state the sampling method. So, and again, justify why. So our sampling method here is always going to be the simple random sample. So what I might say here is I'm going to use the random number generator on my calculator to take a simple random sample from the population. I am taking a simple random sample because it will provide me with a sample that has no bias, very important, and should be a fair representation of the population, again important, because every tree has an equal chance of being selected for the sample. So those are kind of the key reasons why. And our third part here for this particular section is going to be talking about just doing our data. So data is pretty easy. You need your box and whisker. So we need our graphs. The box and whisker. And you will need the dot plots, which are also part of that, because Insight does that all for us. And then we need our statistics. And you need to calculate range and IQR so that you can use those in your write-up. So from those bits you have basically the start of it done. You've got your question, you've got your plan, and you have your data sorted out for us. And then from there we can start talking about the analysis. So take your time on these and make sure that you're quite clear about it. Again, that justify why part on both of these is what gets you to the Merity Excellency side of things. And the question you've just got to get right, otherwise you're not going to pass it. So it's really important that you can write your questions clearly. So practice those and ask me for feedback on them.